The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
When the Facts Change is brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBank, the bank for Kiwi looking to get ahead in business and in life. A bank that delivers expertise and banking know-how, smart advice for business owners wanting to invest, grow their business or diversify. A bank that adapts with technology through the lens of its people and customers. It is a bank with heart that is driven by its purpose. Kiwi making Kiwi better off. There was a moment about 5 years ago when we were this close to having one of the most transformational infrastructure investment projects in our history signed off by Cabinet. We were literally days away from it happening. This is the so-called inner city rail link, the big rail line that was going to go from the Auckland CBD to the airport at Mangere. It was a proposal put forward by the New Zealand Superannuation Fund and a bunch of Canadians who had some pension funds. This was almost there, put forward by Phil Twyford. This was going to transform Auckland and get a whole lot of capital invested in railways, in railway stations, in all of the apartment buildings around there, changing the isthmus of Auckland completely. But it was derailed, pun intended, at the last minute by Winston Peters, who said he didn't want foreign ownership of these railways and the big project. It was canned immediately. And since then, there's been a sour taste in the mouths of big investors looking at public-private partnerships and big projects in New Zealand. And this is unfortunate because the current government wants to get some of these projects up and running with public-private partnerships. Essentially, this is the problem we have. How do we build enough infrastructure for our population growth and fund it in a way that both political parties over the long run will accept? Currently, National is saying it doesn't want to borrow off the Crown's balance sheet, i.e. regular borrowing. Labor has also been reluctant to do it over the years as well, and that's why Phil Twyford had to go with the New Zealand Super Fund and the CDPQ Canadian Pension Fund option. Now, it's not clear which way a new Labor government would go, but certainly PPPs are the flavour of the current government's month, if you like, and we are still trying to work out whether these big projects that are being talked about will actually be funded. It's going to be difficult in the wake of that debacle way back 5 years ago with the inner city rail link. This week on When the Facts Change, we dig into these gnarly issues around how do we fund our infrastructure and how it's done overseas. I talk with Nick Leggett, the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand, from a hotel room in Ottawa in Canada, where he's been visiting a bunch of local and federal government infrastructure builders, looking at big projects and working out how we could do it in New Zealand. And the conversation takes an interesting turn. We eventually work out that the key question that both political parties and, frankly, voters need to answer is how big do we want New Zealand to be? Do we want Aotearoa New Zealand to be around 6.5 million in 50 years' time? Or more like 11.5 million which is what we would get if we continued our population growth of the last 20 years. Currently, our politicians don't talk about it, and Stats NZ, the official forecaster, is actually assuming that our population growth will slow down again to 0.5% from around 1.6% that it's been for the last 20 years. I don't think that's likely to happen, and that's because both sides of politics just quietly like strong population growth, but they don't like infrastructure investment to go with it. And this is the problem that we talk about this week on When the Facts Change with Nick Leggett from Infrastructure New Zealand. Well, kia ora, and welcome to Nick Leggett, the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand, who's joining us in the When the Facts Change studio from Ottawa in Canada. How are you, Nick?
Kia ora. Very well, Bernard, actually. Despite the time difference, it's been an action-packed visit for us so far.
Yeah, tell us what you're doing over there in Canada and what you're hoping to learn and who you're learning with.
Well, every year, Infrastructure New Zealand, we're a membership organisation, and we have a lot of private sector members who build infrastructure and some public sector members too. We take people from New Zealand to another country or countries to look at the system, the settings, and some of the projects that are happening in other parts of the world. It's pretty well acknowledged, New Zealand has this big infrastructure gap, which you and I have talked about previously. Some call it a deficit. Whatever you want to call it, it's big. Probably $200 billion plus. And as I've also, I think, told you before, 60% of it is actually money that we should have spent on the assets we've already built, renewing them and maintaining them that we haven't. And so we've got to catch up with what we've got, and then we've got to also build infrastructure assets that help us for the future. That includes housing, that includes social services like schools and hospitals, it includes transport, water, obviously, ports, airports, you name it.
And so what have you been visiting there?
Well, we do focus on infrastructure systems. We look at comparisons as to see how other nations actually arrange themselves and how governments procure, how they fund, how they design and build, and what's the nature of those arrangements. A big part of what we've looked at here are how they have successfully, and in some cases unsuccessfully, done public-private partnerships. Those can spook some people out in New Zealand. They're seen as sort of privatisation. In actual fact, they're not. They're just a different way to procure using private funds. The ownership stays with the government. And New Zealand turned the tap off. Canada turned the tap on. No one way is perfect. Our view is that we should utilise public-private partnerships in New Zealand where they suit the bit of infrastructure. So we've looked at that, understood where some of the pitfalls have been. We've learned, for instance, that it's probably unwise to do a PPP for a mass rapid transit or a light rapid transit. Think about light rail, something like that, which is good learning, I think.
Why is that? What is it about PPPs that didn't work for that rail project?
I think it's the complexity and the expense in the build. They often go over time. Essentially what public-private partnerships do is allocate risk to where that risk best fits. You think about, the government does and, procures a normal, let's say a bridge or something like that. The risk will generally sit with the government. And the way we do things at the moment, they write the check. If things take longer or cost more, depending on the particular arrangements, the government's up for the cost of any blowouts or time delays. PPP works differently in that those people that are building and funding are all in on it and are taking, they've got skin in the game, so they're motivated to ensure that things are planned properly, that risks and other problems are anticipated and built into and worked out. And the theory and the practice is that you get a faster, better designed piece of kit, but the complexity with light rail and imagine in city areas often it involves demolition. There are costly, time-consuming issues with laying down tracks and going through communities. It's that PPPs are not suitable for that. These are good learnings. Canada's built a lot. It's quite mature in terms of its infrastructure. It's also grown really significantly in terms of population, so it's had to build the infrastructure to match it. But we were quite keen on Canada. It's a Commonwealth country. It's got the three levels of government: municipal, which we'd call local government; provincial, which we'd call regional; and of course, central government, which they call federal government. And federal obviously has got a lot of the taxation ability, but very little involvement. Well, it's got a lot of funding involvement in infrastructure, but not much ownership. It only owns about 3%. What it does own are pretty big, sort of meaty infrastructure projects. And then so at provincial level, they've really powered up the government side skills, commercial skill sets on the side of the public service. So they're much better, I think, at getting these deals negotiated, irrespective of how what the setup is. So they've got the skills and the knowledge and the experience commercially inside government. I often hear people say, "Oh, we should go back to the old Ministry of Works," right? And I always think, the problem with that is it's obsessing about form, which I think we tend to do as humans quite a bit, rather than functions. What would you want a Ministry of Works to do? What are we not getting that perhaps we used to get in New Zealand? But actually on this trip, some of us have been discussing the fact that, well, we actually do want more skills to drive infrastructure, fund infrastructure, get the best deal for taxpayers and ratepayers inside government. We also want a lot more central driving of policy around standardisation in terms of driving the best outcomes. If you're thinking about climate adaptation, if you're thinking about the way, the sort of infrastructure we want built, we want the principles to emanate from really good policy across government. And the best way you do that is by bringing those skills in-house. So I'm sort of, as I say, I want to know why you do something. Just the idea that you just have a Ministry of Works and everything becomes great again is a hard one to sell to me. But actually, I can see the benefit and of really bulking up and getting a big group centralised inside government that can do this stuff. If you think about the challenges we've got with replacing school buildings and hospitals, they are getting a new hospital built into the market every 6 months in Canada. I think there are 9 hospitals being built. Now, yeah, they've got 40 million people and everything else, but they just do things. And I think we're losing that, and we've lost that in New Zealand, to just get on with stuff.
So what is different about Canada that means that they're going ahead, 9 hospitals, the local governments, the state governments are, pounding ahead. They've got these cadre of planners and funders and commercial people. What is it that's different about Canada?
Culture. Well, I was just getting to that point. It's a doing mindset. It's that culture. I think a lot of it's culture. It's not pausing to overturn every thought that you've had about building something and really going over it with a microscope. It's knowing that when you get things built, communities benefit. And that's a challenge New Zealand's got. We tend to dwell too much. We announce a project. Like I saw yesterday, that there's a port in South Otago, an inland port that's been announced, $3 billion. The way the article reads is though that it's being built tomorrow and that the funding and the consents are all in place and that it's a happening thing. It's not happening. There's nothing. The only thing is that somebody's put a concept out there, but the media have announced it, and clearly, the people who are promoting it have encouraged this, that this is going to happen. So we build expectations of the community. Auckland Light Rail is another one. $100 million was spent on business cases, design, planning, things that absolutely need to happen. But there was no money guarantee. There was no way to fund it. There was no real political commitment. And so that's why you involve private partners. Like Phil Twyford brought a concept to Cabinet for Auckland Light Rail going back 7 or 8 years, which was actually looking at a Canadian pension fund who we met the other day.
What did they say about the whole thing?
They do have other investments in New Zealand, but I think it's fair to say without, that when New Zealand, that got to Cabinet, that was almost on the verge of things. And, it really, I don't think that did great things for New Zealand's reputation internationally. That would have been pretty close to being finished by now. They would have owned it. And that would have sat uncomfortably with some people, but Auckland would have had light rail. Auckland badly needs better public transport. And this is the thing. You can sit and obsess about models. You can, rightly be concerned about who owns and who procures and who funds. But we don't, in many ways, we've got to work out what's best, design properly, but move fast. And I think Canada does that. They've got a mindset to build. They've matured, and because they've tested stuff out, this is the other thing. Perfection doesn't last for long. That's the other thing. The way you build stuff, the model you use, might work really well for one project. And then on the next one, you go, we've got to change a few things. We've got to accept that there are just different, like everything matures and evolves. It's like the stuff that we're building now to mitigate climate. In 10, 20, 50, 100 years' time, it might be different. The way the houses we live in have evolved and will continue to evolve.
There is a lot of volatility and uncertainty out there, particularly offshore. But you know what? There's some good news. The New Zealand economy is recovering from a deep and painful recession. This year is predicted to be better than last, and 2026 looks even brighter. Lower interest rates are fueling a recovery, easing the cost of living and creating opportunities for businesses. Learn more about New Zealand's positive economic outlook at kiwibank.co.nz.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
I'm curious about Canada and its population growth, which is very strong. And they have many of the same issues with housing shortages that we do. And I'm curious to know what you've learned on that trip about infrastructure for housing, how that's being funded, and, what are the stresses and opportunities there?
Yeah, I've actually seen, because I came here for a couple of days and spent some time with some family, I've seen some alternative housing models and, things like senior apartments owned by the city, geared to income, and that it goes to other parts of the population as well. But, you can be a senior without assets. You go into one of these really big buildings, there might be 150 apartments. You pay your monthly rental based on, your assets and how much you earn. There are people that go into some of those with considerable assets. They sell their houses to do it, but they pay, a sum that reflects that. So far more flexibility in housing assets. They've got apartments which are often city owned. I would say that municipalities are better funded, and I think this is something New Zealand has to also really think about. Do we want centralised housing ownership? Do we want properly funded local government or non-government organisations owning housing? I would, tend to probably favour the latter. But having said that, I think once again, it's a maturity question. How do we build houses? Because what you do is, even if you might think, well, an older person might sell their home and go into an appropriate apartment and pay the rent that they can afford. They're also opening up the house they're selling to the market. So they're not staying in it. They're opening it up to the next family and potentially the next generation. So there's a lot of movement around, and it's not isolated. It's quite well accepted. That's, again, cultural. It's mindset. No, I'm going to stay in this house forever. That's the way we tend to sort of do things in New Zealand sometimes.
One thing I'm curious about is who's doing the funding of all of this building in Canada? Because in New Zealand, there's a clear issue where both councils and the central government don't want to put a lot of this cost, particularly the capital cost of these projects, onto their balance sheets, i.e. they don't want to borrow to pay for this infrastructure, and they'd like someone else to do it, either the council or the government, if it's the government or the council, or the private sector. So what are they doing in Canada?
Well, I mean, Canada's got, it's got a scale, both in terms of its physical geography, but also in terms of its population, that New Zealand doesn't have. It's also close to North America, which, we've seen some rāru over that recently, but nonetheless, it's a big market that helps them earn money, and it's a very strong trading partner. Local government is, I would say, significantly better funded in Canada by central government. So money comes down.
So there's grants back from the central government to the local government.
Capital grants for infrastructure.
And that's the thing you get a lot in Australia as well, where the central government shares a lot of the GST income, and there's a regular annual negotiation in which there is money flowing from central to local, whereas lately, and to be fair, under both flavours of government, there haven't been too many of these sorts of grants, not nearly of the scale seen in the likes of Australia or Canada.
And I would say to you, Bernard, what I look at here and in places like Australia and other parts of the world too, is that a system where there's lopsided power and funding lacks attention that gets a better result in terms of housing, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of getting things done faster. So, look, big housing pressures here, but it seems to me they will be able to potentially build their way out. We were not wonderfully impressed with what we heard from the federal government on their plans. It sounded very New Zealand in many ways. Well, we're going to try this, and we've got this policy, and we're going to, give this a go. Didn't really feel. I mean, that's the other thing about the trip. We've seen a lot that has worked and is better, and a lot that's the same.
Anything that was a real highlight, that stood out, it surprised you, and you thought, oh, that looks good, and maybe we could look at doing that?
Yeah, I would say to you that there's an infrastructure bank, the Canada Infrastructure Bank. They are mandated by government. They're not controlled by government. Government sets the themes of where they invest. So climate, adaptation, housing growth are all themes. But government doesn't go and get involved in projects like it would in New Zealand. But they are given money that they have to get a return on, but they can, negotiate the rate to make it a sweeter deal. And then they bring private capital to the table. So it's blended finance, if you like. And what that means is that they're making things happen that otherwise wouldn't. And I think it's a really good example of where a government can allow some intervention, and they're doing that a lot in First Nation communities. They're doing it with sort of port infrastructure, things that are going to stimulate local, isolated communities. I think in the last 10 years, they've put about $12 billion, $13 billion into different projects, and that's attracted about $24 billion of private investment. So it's and they started slow. I think they stuffed up. This is another good lesson for New Zealand, but they've changed and they've refined and they've improved and they've got on the right track. We would, you imagine one government announced something like that, it maybe got off to a slow start or it made some mistakes. The next government to can it will be gone forever. I mean, they benefit perhaps from having a longer term government here. Political stability is a key part of infrastructure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's why Infrastructure New Zealand talks so much about bipartisanship. There's got to be common things. We shouldn't politicise infrastructure and what it does between the major parties. We've got to agree on some common core system and settings. But so I think that the infrastructure bank is quite exciting because it seeds programs or seeds projects, should I say, that can really be community building, job adds to jobs, and not having that political interference, having political oversight. Politicians set the agenda or set the themes, and they obviously allow the money, but we've got to get a lot of more stuff at arm's length. I think in Aotearoa, I think we are too. We've allowed these things to be too politicised, and then therefore they go back and forth. I think as citizens, we've got to decide what it is we want as a country, and then the infrastructure should follow that, and we should get the day-to-day reactionary politics out of it.
So on that issue of, bipartisanship and having some sort of overarching plan that can survive a change of government, we've got this basic problem where we have the last 20 or 30 years forecast population growth of about 0.5% per year, and we're still forecasting that. But we've actually had population growth of 1.6% per year on average over the last 20 years. And one of the sort of core things when you're thinking about how you fund things, how big you build things, how, what sort of population you're going to build for, really depends on that population growth forecast. Or
it's the first question. How big do we want to be, and where do we want to grow? And I do think, go back to my maturity point, Auckland is the economic powerhouse of the country. We all need Auckland to do well, irrespective of where we live. But then we've got to regionalise the strategy as well. What do the parts of New Zealand each offer that's unique, that builds the national offering, so we can be competitive globally? And then the growth. So if you say, well, the West Coast might be good at this and this, and it's going to grow here, everybody should have that plan, and their infrastructure should reflect where we might have to do some infrastructure that leads growth in many areas. That's okay. The big lesson I've got from what I've seen internationally, Bernard, from infrastructure is people don't regret building these projects. We have make up such a big fuss in New Zealand, and often the fuss kills building. And you think about issues around density in cities. Density allows us to build quickly, and it provides accommodation and choice for whole groups who are often shut out of the market. That should be the overriding principle, not looking after my backyard and my 500 or 600 square metre leafy section. Now, we've got to balance it. Of course we do. But we do have to have, your growth discussion would drive every other discussion that we need to have as a nation.
So why don't both parties actually talk about this in public? Because in essence, for the last 20 years, they've both had a de facto policy of about 1.5% to 2% population growth, but with infrastructure investment for 0.5% or less. And that doesn't match. So why do you think they don't talk about it? Because, being optimistic, ambitious is something politicians say they want to do, and everyone loves to, go for the big thing. So why haven't they said, okay, seriously, guys, what we actually want is 1.5% to 2% growth, which means 11 million people in this country by 2070, not the 6 million you probably think is going to happen. Why don't they talk about that?
I think there are two reasons. The first reason is they're scared of provoking that debate and the reaction. I think that's what you wanted and expected me to say. But the second thing is that don't expect too much of our politicians. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that just honestly. We as citizens, be it, the neighbourhoods we live in, the communities that we're part of, the businesses that we're involved in, or our workplaces, we have to grapple these issues and have the difficult discussions, and politicians will follow. And so start thinking about how big do we want to become and where do we want to grow and what are we going to be good at, all of us, and how we shape that into a national conversation. What's our North Star as a country? Where are we headed? Because politicians will follow that, and we don't have to agree on everything. It's not about some big written document, but it is a national agenda that is lived out through the policies and of all parties, but particularly the major parties because they're often in the driver's seat. We can shift the conversation as a country, and we can shift it to have a much longer term multi-generational direction. I mean, we want to know that we're setting our environment, our housing, our communities up for the people that are going to be living in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 150 years' time.
Nick Leggett, the CEO of Infrastructure New Zealand, talking to us from Ottawa. Ngā mihi nui, Nick, for coming on to When the Facts Change.
Kia ora, Bernard.
When the Facts Change was brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with KiwiBank. Visit kiwibank.co.nz to find out how KiwiBank are making Kiwi better off.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.